So what should one make of President Trump's statement about going to have a trade deal with India? His praise of Prime Minister Narendra Modi being tough, trade negotiations, punishing Pakistan terror? What's he referring to? Let's try and decode Trump's statements and this hyphenation between India and Pakistan, saying both these guys are tough, the leadership is tough in both the countries. Joining me on India First is Pramit Pal Chaudhary, Head of India Practice Eurasia Group. Dr. Mohan Kumar is former ambassador to France and Bahrain. Also with me, Jayant Krishna, former CEO, PM Skill India Mission and senior fellow at the CSIS. Pramit Pal Chaudhary, when Trump calls Prime Minister Narendra Modi tough, is that in context of trade negotiations or Operation Sindoor?
Well, he's actually called him tough even before Operation Sindoor and before the trade negotiations began. He's said that quite often in the past, even in the campaign last year, where his presidency, he had mentioned, and I think he's confused these meetings, that he had spoken to Modi in the first Trump administration about Pakistan, and he had quoted Modi as saying that, we've beaten them before and we'll beat them again. So this is a standard line and something that is deeply embedded in his thinking about Prime Minister Modi. So there's nothing very new about this. Sindoor, I think, has only strengthened that. Trade negotiations possibly as well, but Trump himself, should we say, has not been directly involved in the trade negotiations going forward. But trade, I think, in his view, is something that he is tough about more than anything else.
Dr. Kumar, does the statement indicate US tried to dangle the trade deal, the carrot, but Prime Minister Narendra Modi said, no, we will fight? And would that indicate that trade deal carrot did not work, even though India officially claims there was no conversation around trade during Operation Sindoor in any conversation with the Americans?
So thank you very much for having me. I've always felt you should take President Trump seriously, but not literally. And if you're going to take him literally, word by word, you will tie yourself up in knots. So I would suggest to you that I think we focus on the trade deal. And there, I think he has refrained from criticizing Prime Minister Modi. I don't think he has ever criticized Prime Minister Modi. Even he has been, as far as being critical of India, he's only called our economy a dead economy. But other than that, I don't think he has been critical at all. I think India has handled the trade negotiations, from my perspective, very well. We have not sought confrontation, but we have not capitulated, and we have tried to keep the conversation going without getting into a slanging match on every statement that he makes. So that's absolutely the right strategy to follow vis-a-vis President Trump. And obviously, we have stuck by the red lines that Indian government has conveyed. And that is why President Trump is saying that Modi is tough, Prime Minister Modi is tough. So all in all, I only take this particular aspect that I think we have reached the final lap of the trade negotiations. And as a former trade expert, to me, it's important that we finish the crossing line on trade, because I think you could have all sorts of issues with the economy. It'll be great if we can get this out of the way so that we can focus on the FTA negotiations with EU and other things.
Okay. And Jayant Krishna, Trump saying Prime Minister Narendra Modi said, no, we will fight. If we were to take him seriously, but not literally, as Ambassador Mohan Kumar puts it, two things seem to emerge. One, India called out Pakistan's nuclear bogey. And two, even if the Americans dangled a trade deal carrot, that did not work. Operation Sindoor is still on, and there is no trade deal yet. Okay, I think you're on mute. Request you to unmute yourself, sir.
Yeah, Gaurav, so I think, President Trump should not be taken too seriously beyond a point. What he talks on his social media platforms depends on which side of the bed he gets up from. I mean, let's not forget, in the past, he has talked about India being a failed economy. He has said that India and Russia, he has lost to China, and all kinds of things. And he has been consistent with his praise of Prime Minister Modi, So I think, to my mind, linking it with the Pakistan conflict, which is fortunately over, doesn't make any sense, much sense. From the point of view of, which way the trade negotiations are going on after last lap of discussions that Commerce Secretary Rajesh Agrawal had in the US. I think that is very, very important. And what are the irritants which are remaining, which are yet to be sorted? I think those are very, very important. Some of the irritants, to my mind, which are yet to be sorted. Of course, Government of India does not divulge, and rightly so, as to what discussions happened in the last round of meetings in the US. But the other Section 232 tariff, which links. Which are related to the U.S. national security, which covers products like aluminum, steel, car, auto parts, timber, furniture, and so on and so
Okay.
forth. So I think what is the discussion on that? Because if you remember, initially on steel the duty used to be 25%, and on aluminum it used to be 10%, which he had imposed in his last innings, 2018. This year in February, on both the products on steel and aluminum, it became 25%. And with the additional tariff, it became 50%. Now, at this level, even at 25%, the export to US of these two products doesn't make sense at all. It doesn't remain competitive. So where it stops, I think that's very, very important. Some of the
Okay.
issues on agriculture and dairy and those kind of products, I believe there has been some softening on India's stance on non-genetically modified corn and soya and so on and so forth. I hope there's some way forward to freezing these kind of things also.
So,
US has
Pramit Pal Chaudhary, let's take this step by step. Trump seemed to indicate that there's a trade deal that will happen with India. Now, Prime Minister Modi was in the US in February. Since July, we are told trade negotiations almost done. Recent indications post a conversation between Trump and Modi. Do you see a trade deal happen? Is it on the cards, or will it also depend, in your view, whether President Xi, what's the outcome of President Xi and President Trump's conversation in South Korea?
So in June, we had a deal with the United States in the sense that both trade negotiating teams had come to an agreement. It was sent up to the White House. The White House rejected it. In other words, President Trump rejected it. And so the original plan for an announcement on July 1st got canceled. I think we are now back exactly to the same place. A deal has been, from what I've heard, more or less worked out. It has been sent up to the White House for clearance. There are possibly one or two minor issues, but keep in mind, Trump has a habit, and I'm less concerned about the China deal than I am about what has been signed with the ASEAN countries, Southeast Asian countries, because they have accepted more liberal opening up to American farm exports, but accepted tariffs in the range of about 20%. Or effective average tariffs for goods. In effect, what I'm hearing is that the White House is saying, well, if the Indians are saying they want a 15-16% effective tariff rate, but are not giving America as much agricultural access as ASEAN, how does this work? So you should accept at least what the Southeast Asian countries are doing. So that, I think, is the last bit that we're sort of waiting to hear about. And it's not impossible that we may see our effective tariff rates increased a couple of percentage points before the final deal is done. But my sense would be, and as I said, President Trump is really the joker in the pack, because he comes in and can often make very whimsical decisions, which his own administration are baffled by. I would say that there's a very good chance of it coming to at least an announcement before the end of this year.
So an announcement that there is a trade deal in place, you think happens by the end of this year around 20%, but with those concessions that they're seeking on agriculture and dairy, or without that, what are you picking up through your sources, sir?
It would have to be with those concessions. Otherwise, America will not sign. You have to understand that for Trump, his looking at his core farm base, which is in the American Midwest, the states of Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, and so on. These are corn, soya, producing states. We have conceded, for example, on apples and almonds, but apples and almonds are grown in California and Washington, which are Democratic states, so he doesn't care about those. So for him, it's absolutely essential that we look at these type of products for him to be able to sell that politically at home, or for him to be even interested in a trade deal with India. But what we are hearing is that the actual corn and soya Grain, India has said we don't accept genetically modified crops, but the products that are produced, the oil, the soybean oil, we are the world's largest importer of soybean oil. We need livestock feed because we have low dairy productivity issues, and that means corn, corn and soya cake, which can be sold and fed to our animals. We do need that. We have to import about 14 to 20 million tons a year. On these, we can agree to. And that's where I think the deal is effectively is being made.
Okay. Dr. Kumar, your assessment of Trump's statement doing a trade deal with India, is there more clarity when and on what terms? And does Trump follow this G2 US-China conversation that is happening? And where does that leave India in your view? What happens? Does a lot depend on the outcome of President Trump and President Xi Jinping conversation tomorrow?
I think that we will see a trade deal before the end of the year. So I agree with other panelists who have said more or less the same thing. On China-US, I'm glad you asked this question. My sense is that President Trump himself has come to an assessment that India, the costs of alienating India far outweigh the benefits. That is my sense, frankly. And tomorrow's meeting or today's meeting with US-China, I do not believe it's going to be a complete 360-degree deal. It's going to be an interim deal because the Chinese are not going to give on a platter a complete relaxation of restrictions on rare earths and magnets. So they will hang the Damocles sword on the US, and the US will also not be able to tell China, we will give you the best chips completely free of restrictions. So what you are going to see is at best a truce. In these circumstances, my sense is geopolitically, I think President Trump will also be more inclined to sign the deal with India. This is an assessment that I've seen, and that is the main reason why the US has changed, frankly. I mean, trade, 90% of it is trade, but this trade deal, everybody knows, is not about trade. It's about Russian oil. It's about the US-China relationship, as you say. It's also a question of the US now wanting India on its side. It will not be permanent. It will still be a tug of war, but I think there has been a changed assessment in DC.
Okay. Pramit Pal Chaudhary, before I bring in Jayant Krishna, your reading of India-US relationship currently at a time when US relationship with Pakistan seems to be improving, and he calls Asim Munir his favorite field marshal, or words to that effect, and he gets Shahbaz Sharif to praise him. Where does that leave India-US relationship if you have US so close to Pakistan, or Trump so close to Pakistan?
Well, I think, yes, that's the key difference. Trump is very susceptible to, should we say, ego massaging. And that's what the Pakistanis have basically done. They also seem to have dumped a lot of money into crypto schemes that are directly supported by Trump's inner circle and his family. Also a good way to win points with Trump. But the point is that after that, your problem for Pakistan is they have almost nothing to offer the United States. Trump, the administration as a whole, looks at Pakistan and says, what do you bring to the table? You are not strategically important now that the Americans have left Afghanistan. The Pakistanis have offered oil. The British began looking for oil in Pakistan in 1915. ExxonMobil, Aramco, Sinopec, CNPC, Total have all looked for oil in Pakistan. There is no oil in Pakistan. They offered minerals, but the minerals are deep inside Balochistan, and the Chinese have attempted to mine them and have had their engineers killed, kidnapped by the Baloch rebels. There is no economic benefit that Pakistan can offer the United States, and there's very little strategic benefit that they can offer. So the problem with Pakistan is that you can woo the president, yes, and he can make these statements, but on the ground, what matters with the Trump administration is not what the president says, but what the administration does. And my sense is that Pakistan is simply running out of things to offer the United States that is practical. Trump himself now is no longer talking about Indo-Pakistan peace and a ceasefire and trying to win a Nobel Peace Prize through that. He's now saying, I'll try to broker a deal between Pakistan and the Taliban. Have fun trying to do that, because you can be assured the Taliban will pay absolutely no attention to that offer.
Oh, absolutely. And I believe even as we speak, there's an incident that's taking place in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. That's what we're learning from sources. We'll get you more information on that. But Jayant Krishna, a trade deal with India is also in the interest of the United States of America. Your reading of US inclination towards Pakistan, is it only Trump and Asim Munir? As Pramit Pal Chaudhary said, Pakistan doesn't have much to offer. Ultimately, Trump does realize that America needs India, though in Japan there was almost no conversation about Indo-Pacific.
So, Gaurav, I'm not much concerned about, successive, honeymooning by various American presidents vis-a-vis Pakistan. They keep on throwing a few $1 million here and there directly or through international agencies. But the fact is, as the other panelists also mentioned, I mean, there is no serious economic benefit that Pakistan can offer. So I'm not concerned much on that front at all. All I'm concerned is that, in the current round of negotiations or the next round of negotiations, where does this tariff settle down? If you look at today, it's 50%, out of which 25% is a penal tariff, which should go anyway because we have already started, lowering our import of crude oil from Russia after sanctions against those two large companies, right? So where from between 10% and 25%, where it settles, that would actually determine as to how competitive our exports to the US remain. If you look at UK and Japan, they have about 10%. European Union has about 15%. Countries like South Korea also has 15%. Sri Lanka, Vietnam, Taiwan have 20%. Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines has 19%. So between 10% and 25%, these are the countries with whom we compete for exports to the US. I think where it settles is going to be, to my mind, eventually it will settle anywhere between 15% to 20%. I think that's what India's entire focus has to be. That the lower it is, the more beneficial it is, obviously, for the Indian exporters, and that's what the entire focus of negotiations going forward from Indian side should be, to my mind.
So interesting, you say now that there are penalties on the two Russian oil firms getting oil from Russia clearly, and there are sanctions. So India will look for other options. But what about Pramit Pal Chaudhary, the deal with Russia on that narrow body transport aircraft? Do you see trouble with America on that, or with that our relationship with Russia also remains good, and with America?
So the Superjet, I think, let's see how it works out. The problem with the Superjet is slightly different, I think, because it's built by Sukhoi, which is a company that is sanctioned by not just the US, by the EU. It means Indian airlines who try to buy it, but who have to deal with foreign destinations, IATA regulations, and so on, will simply be very reluctant to buy it. Including the fact that Indian banks will not be able to finance it, insurance companies will not be able to insure it. I think this is a longer-term game. If this aircraft, you're really looking at an aircraft that can be sold maybe 3 or 4 years down the line, by which time there hopefully a ceasefire in Ukraine and sanctions have been lifted. So that's I think the bigger story is that as we reduce our dependence or reduce our purchases of Russian oil, we have many other options. Hardeep Puri, the oil minister, said we have 40 countries offering us oil. Iraq is offering it at a price even lower than Russia. Is going to be other products, and notably, I think, fertilizer. You're going to be seeing a large import of urea coming in, which will be in many ways sort of compensation, if you wish, for the oil. Urea and fertilizer and all agricultural products are exempt from sanctions.
And that's required not just by India, but by Global South, and that's something that India has constantly pushed for. Ambassador Mohan Kumar, can I draw you in for a moment on one part of what Donald Trump said, where he said, I'm reading that 7 shining new planes were shot down. 19th of July, and let me take you back, that time he said he was hearing of 4 to 5 jets shot down. Now he says 7 shiny new jets were shot down. Not once has he said Indian jets. Pakistan claimed it shot down Indian jets. Indian Air Chief went on record to say India had shot down several Pakistani planes, including an airborne early warning system in the air, multiple on ground, including F-16s and JF-17s. What do you make of the American president's claim?
Well, I make nothing much, actually. As I said, I would take him seriously, but not literally. The 7 could be distributed between the two countries. It could be 5 on their side, 2 on our side, frankly. And this has been a bit of an issue, I would say, very frankly to you, even in our narrative, frankly. And I think we could have done a better job in terms of actually listing out exactly what we did. So I would say that now there is much water that has gone under the bridge. And therefore, it's futile kind of to focus on how many jets. It's very clear that India has demonstrated air superiority. I'm only saying we lost the narrative a little bit in the beginning, but I think everybody is clear that we were able to demonstrate superiority. I just want to conclude this segment by saying, for me, the trade deal is important, following which I also think it's important for the two leaders to meet. Because there has been so much of back and fro in the relationship, I want the relationship to be now back on an even keel, and therefore it's important for the two leaders to meet. I understand it's maybe difficult for them to meet this year, but sometime next year, perhaps, if we can manage to have the host the Quad Summit and get President Trump to India, because I think with a leader like President Trump, it's vitally important that he establishes that rapport with President Trump. That is now, there is a bit of a hiatus in the conversation between the two leaders. In-person conversation has not happened since February. I am keen that that take place, and it's only then that I think the relationship can be expected to go from strength to strength from there.
But, though I was supposed to take a break, but Pravitpal Chaudhary, permit me 30 seconds to take a leaf out of what Ambassador Mohan Kumar said. It's very risky to meet Donald Trump because you wouldn't know what he would say next and what impact will it have on next elections, whether it's Bihar now or next year. There are a series of state elections and each election extremely important. So does this indicate, one, if India really cannot trust what President Trump will say, then 3 years of his tenure, it's better to stay away than risk a meeting, or can things change?
Well, that's one of the risks you're going to have to do as a statesman, I think, but there are a couple of things to point out. One, the evidence so far, and I believe that's an assessment by a number of governments, including our own, is Trump tends to go off the rails in telephone conversations. If you look at the transcript, for example, of his phone call in the first administration with Malcolm Turnbull, the Australian Prime Minister, where at the end of it, Trump slams the phone down and screams that this is the worst phone call I've had of the world leader. But he tends to be very congenial when he meets you face to face. And so far, the evidence is that when he's face to face, he's like a real estate guy selling his apartments to you. And he tends to be nicer and more sensible than he is on a phone call. On a phone call, you were quite right, he can go off in very strange directions. And one person who's been very nervous about this has been Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping has refused to meet him since he's been sworn in until now, and till this Thursday, right? Because when you talk to Chinese diplomats, they're very nervous about this. They're very nervous that you end up with a crazy Zelensky-type press conference, in which, of course, it would be a huge loss of face for Xi, but would almost certainly result in the US-China relationship going off a cliff. So I think for Modi, the game is, yes, at some point I have to meet this man. Remember, he had a very good summit in February. It worked out reasonably well. But I have to be very careful as to when I do it, and I have to limit those meetings to as few items as possible, chances as possible. But keep in mind, Modi cannot keep avoiding doing this. He cannot skip the UNGA. He cannot skip the G20, the G7, the East Asia Summit all the time. At some point, he has to go there to these summits. And when he does so, he cannot avoid meeting the US president. So yes, as little as possible, but in the end, you have to do this every now and then.
Okay, I will let that be the last word on this part of the show. Ambassador Mohan Kumar, Pravitpal Chaudhary and Jayan Krishna for joining me here on this part of India First. Many thanks. We'll all be watching that President Xi and President Trump meeting.